far as the documentary, you mentioned it's the history of hemp in the U.S. Does
U.S.
does it cover prior to the U.S. or does it really start with, hey, here's where hemp started in the U.S. and here's where it expanded and so on?
What I would envision. I haven't written the script yet. That'll come later when we really have the funding to make this thing. But what I would envision we would do in this is start with some commentary about the origins of hemp. And it is a plant that is native to Asia. Now, however, it's like so much in history, there's a lot we don't know. But we find that the early settlers in Virginia, particularly, referred to a brand of hemp as Indian hemp. And this persisted for many, many years. George Washington he was a hemp grower himself. He referred to a brand called Indian hemp, as did Thomas Jefferson, who also was a hemp producer. Now, there has been some circumstantial evidence that hemp was grown by Native American tribes along the Potomac and along the James River. What that was, we have very little knowledge, but there seems to have been some hemp grown by the native tribes, at least some of them. So we would start with its Asian origins and this possibility of it being raised by the tribes here in America. But its real introduction to this country was by the English settlers. And those are both settlers of what became Massachusetts, Plymouth Colony, 1620, as well as the earlier colony at Jamestown in 1607. There was even apparently an attempt at growing hemp in Sir Walter Raleigh's colony in North Carolina, the colony that failed. But certainly in Jamestown and in Plymouth, they began raising hemp. And the English, the companies that settled these areas, particularly the company that settled Jamestown, was very interested in the settlers there growing hemp. And John Rolfe commented once that one of the prime settlers of Jamestown, that the hemp they raise in America, in Virginia, was as fine a quality as hemp grown in Europe. Now, in England, they didn't raise very much hemp. And you wonder, why does Britain want the settlers in the New World raising hemp? Well, in the 16th century, England became interested in expanding a navy. The other countries, the rivals to England on the continent of Europe, had navies. Britain, being a colony surrounded by oceans, was a natural to become a naval power. And so it began to develop a navy. In order to rig those ships, in order to put sails on those ships, they had to find some fiber. And hemp became the fiber. And up until hemp began to really be grown in America in large quantities, Britain got all of its hemp from the Balkans and from what is now Russia. These were what we would call water-rotted hemp, supposedly the strongest hemp there is. And so Britain was importing it and then making their ropes, their halyards, their rat lines, all those uh, uh, riggings of those ships were made of hemp. And then the sails were made of hemp. So that when they sailed from England to Jamestown, they sailed on a ship that was totally filled with cordage and sails made of hemp. But they were from East Europe for the most part. And so the idea was to get the colonies to supply, if hemp was being raised well here and it was a good hemp, then they wanted them and they wanted it in England so that they could use it for the Navy. And it became the principal item necessary for a sailing Navy is hemp. And so it was incredibly valuable to England. And no sooner did the settlers come into Jamestown than by 1611, they were requiring settlers to raise hemp. The same thing was true in Plymouth colony. It was 1633 when they required all the settlers to raise hemp because they could get money for it. Britain would buy it. And then immediately following Plymouth colony, Connecticut required its settlers to raise hemp. And all of this was for the maritime use of the hemp in the cordage and in the sails for the Navy, for the British Navy.
Wow.
And of course, it ruled the seas at one time.
Were the settlers required to produce other crops as well, or was hemp one of those ones that was like a must for everybody?
That was a must. That was the one that was a must. It's interesting in Virginia, as you can imagine, one of the big things they raised there was tobacco. Well, they did here in Kentucky too, and they still do. Although because of the what's happened to cigarettes and smoking tobacco in America, that's diminished considerably. But when I grew up here in central Kentucky, every farm had a hemp patch, a big one.
Wow.
And every November were the hemp sales and the tobacco sales. So, but that's basically gone now. But in the early settlements in Virginia, and then again in Kentucky later, tobacco was the big crop, the big cash crop. Mm-hmm. And it was a hard thing to get the settlers to raise hemp when they could get the money they were getting for tobacco. Yet, that's the reason they required it. You're just going to have to. Yeah. And it's because that's needed, and you can get some money for that, but you can raise your tobacco, but you're going to raise this. So it was mandated.